Hello everyone and welcome back. Today on the Little Quilter we're going to be working on our Ruby sampler quilt. We are so close. So I have this block, so this is month 9 of the quilt along, and so I have this last one and then we are on month 12. And month 12 I believe is where we're going to be finishing up, making the border and putting everything together. So we're super close. I have 4 blocks in this month to complete. So we're going to do those. I'll probably split that up into 2 videos just because with this new format that I'm doing, the videos are a lot longer. And so the last one I think was like 30 minutes for you guys to see 2 blocks, which is a long time. So we're going to see how it goes. I might have to split them up more, but my plan is to hopefully have this finished and get it ready to go onto the quilting loom and get that done. All right, so without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into piecing the blocks. I've got my pieces cut and ready to go, and here we go. Okay, everybody, so we're going to start out laying out our blocks that we're going to use for this quilt. And there's quite a few small blocks in this, but that becomes obvious because we're actually going to do several flying geese in this. I'm going to do an abbreviated version of the flying geese because you guys have seen me do this multiple times before. If you aren't sure, you can go back review some of the other block of the months that I have done and you can see this more in depth. I will say that the wing clipper ruler has really made a difference in this whole process. I tend to use it for almost all of the flying geese, from cutting them to drawing my lines, as well as then trimming them up at the end of all. So it really is very useful for all of that. And I would, if you had to purchase one ruler for flying geese, I would definitely recommend this ruler for sure. So going through here, and we've already done our heart-shaped. Now I'm going to mark a line down the center of that white strip, sew a 1/4 inch on either side, and we're going to cut through those to give us our 4 flying geese, and then going through and just ironing those out. I iron with the seams going away from me. You know, in this instance, the lighter fabric is the one that is going to show it, but in the end, I don't think it really notices, and it helps the blocks to lay down a little bit better whenever you iron them that way. And so here, I'm just using this wing clipper to go ahead and trim this flying geese block up to where it needs to be, making sure that it's all situated before I go ahead and trim, because I certainly only want to trim once. And now I've done 3 of those blocks, and finishing up this last block here, I've got 4 of my flying geese done, and I will set those aside and we'll move on to the next one. So this is going to be the center block of this quilt, and I wanted to make sure that I lined my flying geese up because that pattern in the center, I believe that pattern's called geranium, is a pattern that has a direction to it. I wanted to make sure that I lined those up so that that pattern was going in all of the same direction. You don't have to do that. I just thought that the block looked a lot more cohesive and a lot better with them all lined up in that direction. If you wanted them going willy-nilly, I think that they would look just fine as well. And honestly, people probably won't even notice very closely that those blocks are lined up completely. Again, since we're going to basically treating all of these little mini blocks like they're 9-patch blocks, we're going to go ahead and whenever I iron, the top and bottom of this block are going to be with the seams going out, and that center block with the seams going in. And this is just going to allow those seams to nest better. So whenever we go through and pin those together, they're going to sit together nicely. You're going to have a cleaner seam, you're going to have a better looking block overall. So that's what I'm doing. I just use little glass head pins to go ahead and place those. If you feel like your edges are a little bit more wonky, the other thing you can do is place more pins. The more pins that you place, the better you're going to have whenever you, or the better seam you're going to have whenever you sew it. And if you're not exactly perfect on your piecing, it will also help to minimize that as well. So if one piece is a little bit longer than the other, placing several pins in there is going to help disperse that. And so as you quilt, you're going to be less likely to get that pleating that you can have if you're trying to sew a larger piece of fabric to that smaller piece of fabric. You know, in some instances you want pleating, such as on a skirt. On a quilt, probably not so much. So I like to go ahead and pin both sides, and then I'm going to come back through here after I've sewn that and go ahead and iron it open. And I always feel like this is the big reveal when I'm doing these, is how well did the seams work out? How well did I do with my sewing and piecing? And I feel like on this top part that they look actually pretty good. I did very well. The bottom part, it's not as perfect. I mean, it's obviously not terrible, and it is not as noticeable, but they could have been perfect. You know, some people would go back through here and they would unpick it and they would try and fix it. For me, what's done is done. You know, it is more important for me to finish the quilt than it is to have it look exactly perfect. Now, I do find taking the steps like I'm doing in this instance and squaring them up is extremely helpful for the blocks to end up looking better. And before I squared my blocks up, you know, I definitely had variability in those. And, you know, I don't know that it's 100% noticeable in the Barnstar quilt, but all of those were about 1/8 of an inch short whenever I sewed those. You know, these blocks are coming way closer to that 12.5-inch mark since I have started increasing the size of my fabric, and so adjusting the fabric pieces that I cut, so cutting them 1/8 of an inch larger. So now we're going to go on to the next step. This is doing the outside part of this block. So we did finish that center block. Again, we're going to be doing some more flying geese. I know this, I told you this block was heavy in flying geese. I feel like this whole quilt is heavy in flying geese, but going through here and just ironing these pieces open. This is something that I often like to do, which is to go ahead and set those seams with my fingers, move to the other one and set the seams. You do have to be careful with that. You obviously don't want to burn your fabric or mar your fabric with the iron, but it's something that I've been doing for a while and helps me to go faster. So you just, again, need to be careful because you don't want to burn your fabric. That would be bad. So going through here, we're going to finish up these flying geese by making our lines and going ahead and cutting those open. So I will let you guys watch that. All right, now that we have got all 4 of our flying geese done, I'm going to go ahead and do some half square triangles here. And so there's going to be quite a few of these half square triangles, and just lining them up nicely so that they're evenly placed there. Again, some people here would pin. You know, if I have a seam, I usually will pin. If I have a really large piece of fabric that I'm trying to keep together, I will usually pin. Otherwise, for something like this, it's small enough that I don't pin this. I'm going to try and line it up nicely so that whenever I mark my lines, I feel comfortable that it looks really good, but I'm not going to put a pin in it. So then after I mark the line, I'm just going to sew a 1/4 inch on either side. And of course, for me, that means that narrow 1/4 inch. And then we're going to go back through and cut these open. And that is going to give us our half square triangles. And since I did 4 of those, that's going to give me 8 half square triangles. Now we're going to go ahead and iron all of these open. So again, I'm going to do this in a manner that some people probably wouldn't like. You do kind of have to be on your toes about it. You don't want to burn your fabric, but I like to go ahead and set my seams, place my iron, move it off, do the next one. And I am trying to do this, in an orderly fashion, but it may, if you're a beginner, I would recommend just doing these one at a time, holding it down there, but this is the way that I iron usually anyway. So now that we've got all of those cut, we're going to go ahead and square these up again. And for my squaring, I like to do the quilt in a day 12.5-inch block. I like to do the larger block. You can certainly buy rollers that will cut smaller sizes than this, but this allows me to do a lot more. After I cut all of those, I realized I was missing a block. I finally found it. It had fallen down on the floor, so I did have to go back through and iron that one by itself and square it up. All right, now that we have all of those completed, we're going to move our flying geese in there, and then we're going to take each half square triangle and line those up, being careful to line them up properly, otherwise that's not going to look right in the end. So sewing those a narrow 1/4-inch seam on either side, and then we're going to go ahead and press those with the seams going out. And this is going to give us this really cool sort of chevron or wave sort of pattern going on here, or mountain pattern if you want to call it that. I don't know if it actually has a name. And then I'm just going to do a nice all over press for it. So now that I've got all of those sewn, ironed, I'm going to go ahead and lay out for our large block here with setting each of those on all 4 sides, and then we're going to take a center block, which is going to give that arrow shaped pattern to each of the corner blocks. Always, I like to go ahead and pin on both sides. Then we're going to sew that narrow 1/4-inch down each side, and now is the big reveal of going ahead and pressing these seams open. Again, there are a lot of seams in this one, so it did take a little bit of pressing to make sure that it was right. It is tempting for me to want to use steam when I have so many of these seams in my block, but again, I try not to use steam or put any moisture back on my block once I have gone ahead and done my best press or starch on there, because it can cause the block to shrink a little bit. And I am trying to keep my blocks as close to possible as to the size that they're supposed to be. Now we're going to go ahead and square up this block and it'll be done. Okay, everybody, that is this block completed, and I think it turned out really good. I really love this arrow point, and I really think that this block just looks so intricate, but at the end of it, it really wasn't that complicated of a block. So you have that square and a square with using these flying geese pattern, and then more flying geese along the edge, and these are just simple half square triangles. So what a beautiful block that is really complicated looking, but not that difficult to put together. Again, I think this would be a gorgeous block to do just as an entire quilt pattern, and even, putting them on point, I think would be gorgeous as well. So loving the pattern as well of fabric, and ready to get on to the next one. So I've got those pieces cut up. Let's get to it. Okay, now these are all of the squares that are going to go into this block, and this is block number 5 with month 9. And there's actually a white block as well that I forgot to show you here. So step 1, you guessed it, we're going to be doing some flying geese, but we're actually going to be doing 2 different colors of flying geese. So that main square is going to be the same color, but I'm going to be choosing 2 different smaller squares, which will end up giving us 8 total flying geese, but they will be 2 sets of 4. So again, we're going to be doing this the same way that we've always done here with doing our 4 at a time flying geese. So I will go ahead and jump ahead to showing you guys what they look like whenever they get done. So what we've got here is all of these have been sewn, and we are going to cut them down that center line, and then we'll be able to press those open, and you'll be able to see that what we end up with here are 2 sets of 4 flying geese with that center red triangle, but either side of them have a different pattern. Now that we've got the flying geese done, we're going to go ahead and actually take the flying geese and sew them together, one on top of the other. You do want to take care whenever you do this and make sure that you watch that little seam that happens at the top of there. Otherwise, what you're going to do is if you sew across that, you're going to end up blunting that flying geese. And so whenever you do your big reveal and go ahead and iron that open, you're going to have a blunted flying geese rather than that nice, beautiful point. And so you can see a little line where each of those intersect, where each sort of seam line intersects, and that's what you don't want to sew over. It's a little bit difficult to show you on camera just because the fabric is so light. Now that I have gone ahead and sewn all of those, I'm going to go ahead as usual and we are going to square those up so that we have a nice square block that is the correct size. So as we go ahead with this block, we have a block that's going to end up looking the way that we want it to. Here are those 2 white pieces of fabric that I talked about that weren't initially shown. We're going to take these 2 large blocks, we're going to make a center line, and we're going to do a very large half square triangle. So again, making our center line, I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch seam on either side of these, wanting to make sure as I move them over that they are lined up. These blocks are so big that if you wanted to put a pin on either side of them, you certainly can. Otherwise, you just want to hold them as you sew, just because you don't want to have them wiggle and end up with a little bit of a wonky block. Again, if you cut these pieces that 1/8 of an inch larger, whenever you go ahead and cut your block down to the right size, you're going to have that little bit of extra to give you some wiggle room, so that what it helps you to do is to kind of fudge the sides where maybe your biased edge was a little bit wonky, maybe your 1/4 inch seam wasn't as good. And so we're going to go ahead and cut all 4 of these, square them up so that they're nice and square, and then we're actually going to be ready to set our large block. So this one actually doesn't have a small block within a bigger block. So we're going to make a very large plus sign with our arrows going towards the block, and then we're taking that half square triangle, and it's going to make this really pretty shape. So again, we're going to go ahead and sew all of these in a row across the top and across the bottom. The big thing when you have these seams that are going diagonal and are meeting is you do want to watch lining those up. And this block was a little bit easier with that. It seemed like it was a little bit more forgiving, so I really liked that about this block. Some of them are not as forgiving with those points whenever you're sewing them together, but these lined up really nicely. And I don't know if it's just because that half square triangle block is so big that it was really forgiving, but it ended up being a fairly easy block to go ahead and piece together. So I'm going to go ahead and finish ironing this, and then we'll go ahead and sew each of the top and the bottom together. Again, we're pressing our seams on the center line in, and we're pressing our seams for the top and bottom out, so that when we sew these all together, they're going to nest together nicely. And once we have done that, we'll do our big reveal here, where we will press our seams up and open, and that's going to show what this block looked like. Now, this block also had several seams on it, so I did have to press them fairly consistently, and you still want to try and not distort your block whenever you're pressing this, even though the block is pretty much finished. As you can see from these seams, like I said, I had some issues with them, so I did have to flip it over and try and set those again even more. So we'll go ahead and finish up ironing this and square it up, and then we'll show you the block. Okay, everybody, so that is this block finished. It's a pretty fun block. It's really an interesting take on that sort of uh, plus sign or the cross sign block that you can get, but I really like the flying geese in it, and there's been a lot of flying geese in this one, so I've been really getting better at doing those flying geese. But I like how it turned out. It's a pretty neat, interesting block for sure. And then our other block, just a refresher of what it looked like. So I hope that you guys enjoyed this. If you did, don't forget to give me a like, thumbs up, subscribe, comment, all that down below. And I will see you guys soon for another Little Quilter. Have a great day, guys. Thanks.